Hi, everybody. This is lecture 1.3. Our topic today is comparative advantage. Let's get into it. The question we're asking is, how do economies interact? We looked at how economies decide what to make and how they combine resources to produce goods, but how do they interact? And the answer is actually quite simple. Economies, instead of producing everything that their own society needs by themselves, they actually specialize in the production of things they're good at. And as a result, they produce a surplus of that good or more than their nation needs. They take that surplus and they go and they exchange that surplus in the international market. We call those exports and imports or international trade. So that's the interaction of our economies on the basic level, right? Now, in order to understand this, we first have to look at specialization. Why do people specialize? Specialization results or we specialize because we know, we're confident in, that there are gains from trade. In other words, if I try to do everything myself, if I tried to, for example, grow all of my own food, I would never have time to do anything else. Sometimes my food would be good, but sometimes it wouldn't. I would never become super talented at anything because I'm trying to grow stuff and I'm trying to kill animals and I'm trying to fillet fish and I'm trying to make this peppers and all this stuff that I need in order to make my food every single day. It's impossible to do. But if I allow farmers to specialize in the production of goods and hunters to specialize in the procurement of meat, or I should say, those are farmers too, and I allow people to create spices and I allow chefs to make delicious meals, I don't have to worry about all that. And now my time can be spent doing something else. Gains from trade. I get delicious, healthy food or unhealthy food, depending on what you want. And I don't have to worry about actually spending my own time. I can instead become I don't know, a lawyer. And now, why are you able to become a lawyer? Because of division of labor. We also specialize in our occupations, right? So a lawyer can spend 40, 60, 80 hours a week, right? Lawyering stuff, like signing documents and arguing in court and all that stuff. And that lawyer is never going to spend any time, I don't know, making his own clothes or producing his own car or harvesting fuel or, anything else that producing his own TV shows to watch. He doesn't have to worry about that. He specialized in being a lawyer, and as a result, he has confidence that everything else that he might need is going to be completed by somebody who is specializing in that good, right? So somebody who's really good at making movies is going to make a movie and he's going to get to enjoy it, right? Somebody who's really good at making food is going to be making the food and he can buy it from the grocery store or get it at a restaurant and he can enjoy it, right? So we can specialize because we know that we don't have to harvest all of the things we need in order to satisfy our own needs and wants. Other people are going to do that for us. We specialize in the thing that we love and we're passionate about, and we can exchange that normally through money, but we can exchange our services or our goods for something else that satisfies the rest of our needs. We get really good at the thing we're producing, so we produce a whole lot more than we would produce otherwise, and then we exchange it with people who get really good at producing what they have, so they have a surplus that they can exchange as well. So that's why we specialize. Okay? The result of this is if everybody is specializing, they're doing the things they're really good at. When you do something you're really good at, you do it really well. And so, as a result, in our society, look at the amount of choice that you have, the amount of goods and services that are out there that you can purchase on any given day. It really is quite incredible. And then all we have to do is exchange, right? People specialize, produce a surplus, and we exchange that surplus through trade. We do it all the time. So, what about nations? Do they do the same thing? Do they experience gains from trade? Absolutely, right? In a place like Saudi Arabia, you can stomp your foot on the ground and you'll hit oil. It's really easy for them to produce oil. Now, oil isn't going to feed their population. Oil isn't going to clothe their children. Oil isn't going to put up shelter. Oil isn't going to give them schools. Oil does one thing, it's a raw material for fuel, right? However, other nations do not have oil right underneath their soil. So, hey, it rhymes. Saudi Arabia is going to specialize in the production of oil. They're going to create an enormous surplus, more than they could ever use, because they have confidence, just like the lawyer, that people who are really good at making shoes are going to keep making shoes. And then in order to get shoes, they can exchange their oil for shoes. Now, that's not exactly how it works, and we'll talk about that later. That's the idea, though. And somebody else who's really good at growing corn, Ohio, is going to grow corn, and they're going to grow a huge surplus of it. And so I'm going to take my oil and exchange it for corn so I can feed my people. So, yes, there are gains from trade. And when we specialize, we produce a whole lot more than we otherwise would be able to. So, what should you specialize in? Nations should actually specialize in whatever they can produce at the lowest opportunity cost. Now, it sounds like fancy economic terms, but you've heard opportunity cost before. But let me break it down for you. You should specialize in the thing that you're good at. For example, if I were an ice company and I want to make ice, should I make it in the icy land or in the tropical land? Yeah, I should make it in the icy land. I'm going to be good at it. I'm going to have a low opportunity cost for it because it doesn't take much to get ice. I just go outside, chip some off, put it in a bag. I got ice. I don't know if you put ice in a bag. Yeah, you do. You can tell this isn't scripted. So put the ice in the bag, right? And you got ice. Super easy. You don't lose a whole lot of time. It doesn't take a whole lot of resources. But in the tropical land, can you make ice? Sure, you can, but it's going to be really hard. You're going to have to create a shelter and refrigerated trucks and pour in a bunch of electricity in order to get the temperature low enough. You can do it, but the costs are going to be a whole lot higher. So let's let icy land produce ice and tropical land produce pineapples. They're both going to produce way more than they could possibly need, and then they exchange. So now there are pineapples in the icy land, and there's ice in the pineapple land, and we can all enjoy a tropical pineapple smoothie. All right, let's keep going. Oh, most important thing, don't keep going yet. We call this, being able to produce something at a lower opportunity cost than another nation, we call this comparative advantage, right? Icy land has a comparative advantage in producing ice, which means they can produce it at a lower opportunity cost. Tropical land has a comparative advantage at producing pineapples. They can produce pineapples at a lower opportunity cost. And that's going to tell us what they're going to specialize in, and that's going to tell us what they exchange. Let's take a look at Lewis and Clark, for example. All right, so Lewis and Clark are exploring the West, and they got to eat, and they didn't bring enough in their lunch pails, right? So now they have to hunt and gather. So Lewis, they decide, let's go try this out and get some numbers, see what's going on. So Lewis, if Lewis spent all day hunting for boar, Lewis could kill 20 boar, right? He's a pretty good hunter. If he spent all of his time and resources foraging for apples, he can get 20 apples. Okay? But right now, because he wants both apples and boar to eat, he goes out and he can get 10 boar and 10 apples if he spends half of his day doing each, right? So trying to take care of all of his needs. Jump over to Clark. Clark is a little different. Clark is not very good at hunting. If Clark spends all of his day hunting, he can kill 10 boar, half of what Lewis can. But he can pick 20 apples if he spends all of his time picking apples. But currently, he's not doing that. Currently, he is killing 5 boar and picking 10 apples a day as a result. And so their total spoils, if they go out hunting and gathering, without specializing exchange is 15 boar, so 10 boar here, plus 5 boar here, and 20 apples. 10 apples from Lewis, 10 apples from Clark. So that's where we're starting at. Now, the question is, should they specialize and trade? Now, I'm going to introduce you to a brand new chart here. Hopefully it'll make some sense. I don't know if you guys can hear, but they're doing some construction next to me while I do this video. So sorry about that. All right, so you're going to want to track along with me. Draw a nice little box here. And in that box, you're going to split it up into 4 quadrants, right? The first, or at the top, we're going to label these. The first is going to be boar, and just B. And the second is going to be apples, so I'll just label that apples. And then down here, I'm going to put my nations, or in this case, my individuals. So this will be Lewis, and this will be Clark. And what you're going to do is you're going to take these extremes, like if they spent all of their time producing this good, you're just going to pop them in. So Lewis, so we're in the Lewis row right here. If Lewis produces only boar, he can get 20 boar. 20. If he goes and picks only apples, he can pick 20 apples. Just popping those extremes in there. Down here for Clark, if Clark goes out hunting boar, he can get 10 boar. So I'll pop that in here, 10B. And if he does apples, he can pick 20 apples. Now, who is better at hunting boar? Not a trick question. It's Lewis, right? Lewis can kill 20 boar versus Clark's 10 boar. He's twice as good, right? Who is better at picking apples? Actually, neither, right? They're a tie. They can both pick apples. So we say in economics that Mr. Lewis here has an absolute advantage in the production of boar, right? He can kill more boar than Clark. So he's got an absolute advantage. That's what we call that. Absolute advantage is your definition, means you can outproduce the other person. That's it, or the other nation. So he's got an absolute advantage there. Now, what about comparative advantage? Well, we know in order to find comparative advantage, I have to find opportunity costs. How do you find opportunity costs? Well, all you got to do, there's actually a couple of ways to do it, but all you got to do is you have to set these two sides equal and solve for one. So for Lewis, I want to know how many apples he has to give up to kill one boar. So I take his two extremes, which is 20 boar, and I set it equal to his 20 apples. Now I'm in the boar category here. So I want to know how many boar or how many apples does he give up to get one boar? So this is one boar equals how many apples, right? So I jump over here. One boar equals how many apples? Well, I have 20 boars, so I have to get that to 1. So I divide by 20, math, and then I divide the other side by 20. And so this is going to be one boar equals one apple. Catch that? In other words, if Lewis decides to go hunting, for every boar he kills, he is giving up an apple he could have picked. Okay. I jump over here. I have to find the opportunity cost for one apple. So if he goes picking apples, how many boars does he give up? I take this same idea, right? I set the two sides equal. 20 apples equals 20 boar. But now I'm solving for apple first. So I say 20 divided by 20 to get one apple. And then I take 20 divided by 20, and that gives me one boar. One apple is going to equal one boar. Another way that you can do this, and my students seem to like this as a numeric device, is OOO, which is output, other, over. This is output because we're producing something. I'll show you an input here in a little bit. So I take the other, which is 20, and I take it over. So one apple will equal other, 20 boar, over 20 apples, so 20 over 20, or one boar. Okay, output, other, over. We'll do a couple of those. I jumped on here to Clark. Okay, so for Clark, how many apples does he give up when he goes hunting for a boar? Remember, he's not very good at it, so it's going to take him longer, so his costs are going to be higher. We know that already, right? That's the logic behind this. Now I know it's output, so I go other, over. So one boar, other, the other is 20. I take 20, I put it over 10. 20 over 10 is going to be 2 apples. Or I set 10b equals 20a, and I solve for b. So I divide each side by 10. 2 ways you can do it, right? And I jump over here and I do one boar, or one apple, sorry, because I'm in the apple column right here. One apple equals how many boar? So if he goes out picking apples, how many boars does he have to give up? Now he's really good at picking apples, really bad at boars, so it's probably not going to, or one boar is probably going to cost him less apples as a result, right? Or so one apple is going to cost him fewer boars, sorry. So all I do is I take the other and I put it over. So 10 over 20, or 1/2 boar. So for every apple he picks, he gives up a half of a boar. Notice that this is just the reciprocal of the other one. So one boar equals 2 apples, then one apple will equal 1/2 boar. If one boar equals 10 apples, then one apple will equal 1/10 boar. Okay, so that's a little shortcut for you. Now I just have to find who has a comparative advantage in each category. We know the comparative advantage is whoever can produce it for the lower opportunity cost. So who should specialize in the production of boar? Well, it's whoever has a lower opportunity cost for boar. So for Lewis, one boar costs him one apple, right? But for Clark to hunt one boar, it's going to cost Clark 2 apples. So it's more costly for Clark. So Lewis is actually going to specialize in the production of boar. Lewis is going to go hunting for boar all day long without worrying about apples. Why? Who's going to get apples? Clark. Clark's going to get all the apples that they need. So let's get another color in here. So who should specialize in apples? We do the same thing. We look at the apple column. Who has a lower opportunity cost for the production of apples? Of course, that is Clark, right? For Lewis, it costs him one boar. For Clark, it only costs him a half of a boar. So Clark, with his lower opportunity cost, is going to specialize in the production of apples. So what are their gains from trade? Well, before, remember, they have 15 boar and 20 apples. Now they have 20 boar, which are hunted exclusively by Lewis, and they have 20 apples, which are picked exclusively by Clark. What are their gains from trade? Well, because they specialize in exchange, they now have 5 more boars. Those are their gains from trade, right? It makes sense for them to specialize in exchange. They have way more meat than they had before. Okay, let's keep going. We'll do this a little quicker. So notice that even though Clark was kind of bad at hunting boar, there's still a comparative advantage and there's benefit when you still specialize in exchange, right? You might say Lewis shouldn't have done that because Lewis is really good at picking apples and really good at hunting boar. But if they work together, they can pool their resources. So Lewis can go and hunt boar, which Clark is bad at. And Clark can still hold up his end by picking a lot of apples, right? So even if there's an absolute advantage for one person where they can outproduce somebody else, there might still be a comparative advantage. And as long as that comparative advantage is there, then it makes sense for them to specialize and exchange. All right, let's keep going. Here are the steps for comparative advantage. You might be a person who likes steps. So whenever you're given this chart, well, my video is in the way no matter where I go. Whenever you're giving this chart, you can do it this way. So first, you find the opportunity cost for producing one unit for each good in each country. That's what we did. Set the two sides equal or output other over OO. Then you identify which country has the lowest opportunity cost for the production of that good. You assign it a comparative advantage for producing that good. And then finally, you know that that country will specialize in the production of that good because they know the other country will specialize in the other one. Okay, so let's try this one real quick. Go ahead and pause your videos and see if you can figure it out. I'll give you a quick hint. Your extremes are going to be 10 and 40 for Oregon and 40 and 10 for Washington. Keep that in mind. All right, how'd you do? Let's check it. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my box. Notice these are production possibilities curves. What's true about their opportunity costs? Right, they're constant. Keep that in mind. All right, so actually I have to redraw that because I drew it too high. There we go. Now, what two goods are we producing? Well, we're producing apples and timber. So I'm going to put an A here for apples. I'm going to put a T here for timber. The highlighted bit might have thrown you off a little bit, but don't fret. The highlighted bit is just what they were producing when they didn't specialize in exchange, just on their own. Now we know over here we're going to have two states here. So we have Oregon and we have Washington, right? So now I simply take my extremes. So I know my extremes are where this point hits the axes. So it's going to be 10 apples. If Oregon produces only apples, they can produce 10. And it's going to be 40 timber. If they produce only timber, it's going to be 40. Okay? Now I jump over here to Washington. If Washington produces only apples, they can produce 40 apples. If they produce only timber, they can produce 10 timber. All right, so you have to set that up correctly first. Now I simply solve for one and get my comparative advantage after finding my opportunity costs. So let's change colors here and see if we can do this. Now I need to find the opportunity cost for one apple. I know one apple, this is output, so it's going to be other 40 over 10. So 40 over 10 or 4. Now again, if that's tricky for you, go ahead and set the two sides equal and just solve for one. So 10a equals 40t, and then solve for a. Divide both sides by 10. Okay, and that'll get you the same result. Over here, I'll do 1 timber because I'm in the timber category now. 1 timber equals, well, it's going to be the reciprocal of 4, or 1/4 of an apple. Or I can do my output other over, which is, I'm here, 40, so other 10 over 40, 10 over 40, 1/4 of an apple. I jump down here. 1 apple is going to equal output other 10 over 40, 1/4 of a timber. And then 1 timber is going to equal output other over 40 over 10, or just a reciprocal of 1/4. It's going to equal 4 apples. That's what you give up. Okay, now we're ready to go. All I have to do is identify who should specialize in what. So who should specialize in apples? Is it Oregon or Washington? Well, for Oregon to produce 1 apple, they have to give up 4 timber. But for Oregon or Washington to produce 1 apple, they only have to give up 1/4 of a timber. So they have the lower opportunity costs, right? So Washington is going to specialize in the production of apples, which means that Washington is going to produce 40 apples. Now they can do that because they have confidence that Oregon is going to provide the rest that they need. So let's look at timber. Oregon can produce 1 timber for 1/4 of an apple versus what Washington can do, which is 1 timber for 4 apples. So it costs Oregon a lot less to produce timber. So Oregon has the comparative advantage in timber. So Oregon is going to specialize in the production of timber. So Oregon over here is going to produce 40 timber for us. And so now we have 40 timber being produced. We have 40 apples. What are our gains from trade? Well, we used to produce 5 apples and 20 apples. That's the highlighted before exchange. So they used to produce 25 apples. Sorry, put that over here. 25 apples. And so how many gains of apples did they have? 15. So they have 15 more apples than they had before. Now they used to produce 20 timber plus 5 timber, 25 timber. So what's their gain from trade here? Well, 40 minus 25, 15 timber. So by specializing and exchanging, notice they now have 15 timber and 15 apples. Okay. We call that gains from trade. So what you do for gains from trade, what we just did, is you just compare your total output before specialization. They have to tell you what they were producing before, and you compare it against the specialized, completely specialized version after we recognize who should specialize in what. Now I'll give you your gains from trade. We're going to come back to terms of trade when we come back to class. I'll add that on there. Real quick, just to wrap this up, why do we have comparative advantage? Comparative advantage is really about the allocation of resources and the accumulation of capital and technology, right? So if nation A has a huge population, then they should specialize in the production of labor-intensive goods, like shoes. If nation B has a huge amount of land, then they should specialize in land-intensive goods, like wheat. The United States is capital intensive. We have a ton of capital, and so we specialize in capital intensive goods and services like hospitals, the production of cars, things like that. Okay, so that's the idea there. We get a comparative advantage because of the resources that we have. Again, I'm going to save the input method for later. Try this one on your own if you'd like. You don't have to. Try it on your own. Notice that this is a little bit of a format switch. Instead of the curves, we have the chart here. Our extremes are going to be represented here, right? A and F are your extremes. A and F are your extremes. See if you can figure it out. We'll talk about it in class tomorrow. All right, that's it. Check out Khan Academy 1.3, Comparative Advantage and Gains from Trade. Good luck, and I will see you in class to talk about input method, talk about terms of trade, add those two things on, those two variants on, and then just practice, practice, practice. All right, have a great day, guys.